Hey, what's going on, guys and gals? CheFPV. Just wanted to take a minute and talk flight controller and firmware real quick. It's another one of these videos that for so long I've been meaning to remake. You know, everything that we're doing and that we've done in FPV and where we're going with FPV, we are continually progressing. And I think a lot of users coming in currently, a lot of the issue we have with how to kind of teach people what's right and what's wrong is we don't even know. Like, everything is always evolving, and what we know is right and what's wrong from early days has constantly changed, right? So what I mean by that is things were really a lot more difficult before. They still are, because you still have to have a layer of technicality, and there's still complexity to all this, and as things evolve, we get more features and more things to play with and tune with our flight controllers and our firmware. So it does stay very technical, but you know, everything as we get new features is new to everyone, not just the new pilots. So I think there's a lot of confusion with flight controller, firmware, and what those mean, and how they're very different, and how they are not exclusive to a particular board necessarily. So we'll start there. The flight controller, I have a Betaflight F3 right here. I think this is an F3, maybe an F4. So flight controller is the hardware, right? So the flight controller, it does what it says, it controls flight. But it needs parameters, right? So this is the hardware that it takes to take in a signal from a radio and tell the different motors and the ESCs what to do. But there's all kinds of other stuff that has to go on before you get there, right? Like, this flight controller, not in theory, but in reality, can autonomously still make an aircraft do something, right? I could technically take any flight controller and put firmware on it that allows me to program it to say, hey, when I tell you to do this, I want you to power on, arm, go up, and hover, right? Like, you can do that. But we fly and we want to tell it what to do. So there's not just the complexity of how do you take all these sensors and make, you know, the motors spin at the right speeds, and the, you know, to get it up, to make it fly, to make it hover, to hold position and all that. But you have firmware that dictates the features and what you can do with the hardware. So basically, people that write firmware can take any hardware and say, hey, I want to make firmware for that so I can do this. And that's how you have Clean Flight, Betaflight, Raceflight, iNav, man, there's all kinds of firmwares out there. Libre Pilot, Open Pilot was the original, you know, for that. So they're different, and they're not typically relative only to each other. So as long as there's a target with that firmware for your board, you should be able to flash it and use that firmware. Now, each firmware is going to have its nuances and its different, you know, things that are good or bad, or pros or cons, or just the different uniqueness to it, right? Just like any other product, you know. A good example is tennis shoes. Adidas tennis shoes have cushion, like some pillow cushion stuff in them, right? Cloud cushion, or whatever they call it. Nikes have Nike Air, they have air in them. So they accomplish the same goals, but they use different features to accomplish those things. And the same thing goes for your flight controller and your software. And so the question becomes, which is better? Well, that's all relative, and that's all subjective to the person and the individual. If you're asking what's the easiest to get up and flying and quickly attain kind of a baseline, well, again, subjective and relative. To me, just flying a baseline quad is not going to really teach you what you really, really want to do, which is to fly that amazing quad does what you want it to do before you think about doing it, right? Like, that's typically what people want in their tune, and they don't realize that it's the tune that gets them there. A properly tuned quad really will, no matter what firmware you're running, a properly tuned quad will pretty much go exactly where you want it, when you want it, how you want it, as you think it. I mean, it's like throwing a baseball, right? When you throw a baseball, I was teaching my son the other day, the body is an amazing thing, the mind is an amazing thing, the hands are amazing, they all work together. And when you figure out the right form to throw, and you practice that, then your body becomes that natural ability. And your mind starts putting the ball where it needs to be when you decide, I want the ball right there on that GDU sign. And when I throw it, it's not about I got to watch the ball as I throw it and make sure it hits there. It's about your body, right? And so same thing goes for a tuned quad. If it's right and you have the form right, which is the tune, then the thing has just got a mind of its own almost, which is connected to you. And it's really, really great and pretty amazing how much it opens up your own flight skills. So the answer to the question, and I know I'm beating around the bush here, is it's all relative and subjective to the user. And the user using the firmware and the hardware properly, which is the tune. If you're having issues specifically with, when I run Betaflight and I have the same board in there, it's just flying weird, something's not right. Well, then I promise you, you have something not right. I say I promise. There's very few times that a specific build of a firmware causes issues that are alleviated by another firmware, if that makes sense. Not to say that Betaflight hasn't had some bad release candidates that have had some issues that the next release candidate fixes. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying I bet you there's settings or there's something that probably changed or it's just different that is causing users to make mistakes that they may not even recognize. And a good example is dumping. When you take a CLI dump off of your firmware, no matter what you run, and you dump it onto a new board, whether it's the exact same brand of board and type of board, or it's just another Betaflight style board or whatever, or Raceflight, you run a risk of adding CLI commands and telling the board to do stuff that it doesn't know what to do, or it's not the right way to do it for that hardware. And again, remember, there's tons of little components and pads on these things, and everybody has their own layout. And they achieve that by using the different layouts and the pins for different things. So all these boards typically have a specific number of UARTs and a specific number of inputs and outputs that the board can take in, and the board design, the way it's laid out, and the features like camera features and VTX smart audio and all that, those use those inputs and outputs. So whereas we used to have flight controllers with 8 motor pins, we typically only have 4 motor pins now on these boards, and they use all the other extra motor pin outs to actually be able to redirect to do other things like camera controls, like VTX smart audio, and all that stuff, right? So by choosing a board that's all-in-one that has all those features, you're losing motor outs. But they're actually still there, and you could use them and tweak them and do different things. But what happens is if I have a Betaflight F4 board and I have a Betaflight F3 board, and I'm talking about the all-in-ones, and I do a dump because I upgrade from the F3 to the F4, the F4 is probably going to have slightly different resource points, and the pin outs that they're using and redirecting are possibly different. And so when I dump that on there, it might take it, and it might let me arm the quad, and it might let me fly the quad, but it might end up having some weird oscillations in it that I can't figure out. Well, what if the oscillations were caused by the dump redirecting a signal to a pad that's now for some reason getting extra signal at some point, or it's killing the signal, or causing an issue somewhere, right? So these are ways that users screw up. So the best thing to do if you're having any issues with any board and any firmware, this is your tip: reset the board. Just completely reset all of it. Don't take any of your dump settings, don't copy them over, just reset it and go in, reset the firmware by re-uploading firmware, then click reset actually on configuration tab and reset all settings, and then go in and set it up scratch. Leave it on stock PIDs, put the filters if you want, turn them off and put part 1, and that's about it, and go out and fly it and see if you have the same issues. Take everything out of the picture. If you have extra stuff, like you have, I don't know, there's all kinds of stuff, GPS and all these other things, take all of it off. Just take it out, reset the board, fresh, and go fly it. I've got quads here that are running CLF4 board. That's an F4S running Betaflight. I think this has 3.4 still on it. I've got my BRAP, my main BRAP here, right? This is my main rig. This thing's running a Betaflight F3. My main rig is running a Betaflight F3 just because it's in there and it works and it's tuned. And it's tuned amazingly well. And I got the tune from Jordan Personally, he messaged me with the tune for it, and I tried it, and I barely tweaked it here and there, and oh my goodness, this thing is my best flying quad, technically. That being said, my second favorite quad that I'm flying right now, XLab Steez. So I have a Steez that's running a Raceflight Revolt, V2 or V3, I don't know, one of them. And this thing's running Raceflight 500. So I've got two quads that are almost identical, and I've actually been running, by the way, two identical quads prior to this. So these two quads, before they became these, were my two Zeus HDs. In my two Zeus HDs, I had a Raceflight and I had a Betaflight quad, and they were exact same builds. Everything was the same. And I started doing this right around Raceflight 300. And that's where I started figuring out. I was like, hey, you know what? They're just different. I got both of them flying really well. And I mean, like, these are both as locked in, I think, as they're going to get on Raceflight and then on Betaflight. They fly different, though. What I mean is my Raceflight quad, it's Raceflight is in the name. It's Raceflight. It's predictive, and it tends to know where I want to be after a crash, or if I hit something, or it puts me where I want to be in a straight line, right? Like it holds a track line like no other. The only issue I have with it is that in freestyle flying, I find that me bashing on the sticks and trying to, so, you know, when you freestyle fly, you've got Super Expo on, and you finesse the sticks a little bit, and then every once in a while you want to hammer the stick and really flip it over fast and long, right? Well, for me, Raceflight, it doesn't. I don't find that it likes that as much, and it's not that it doesn't like it. It's weird because on video you can't tell, and it looks just as good. But when you're flying it, it corrects itself sometimes into positions just because I slam the stick. It's not like it over rotates and bounces. It just over rotates. Like if I want to go inverted and I want to like yaw spin, and then I want to flip it over and stay inverted again, it's hard to achieve that maneuver. It actually, on that second invert, it actually like says, nope, you should go back this way. Or I don't know, and it fights me a little bit. But it doesn't fight me, it just puts me somewhere that I don't expect, if that makes sense. The Betaflight quad, not at all. It is not predictive in the sense that the Raceflight we know actually runs predictive filters. This thing on whatever the latest, it's like 3.5, I think, 352, right? It is just butter smooth when it's tuned. It just goes exactly where I want it, how I want it. It gets me out of, you know, at the last second when I pull out and I think I'm about to hit something, I get away from it. Like it just feels more simple, more easy. It feels like I know what it's gonna do. Whereas when I'm flying this one, I know what it's gonna do. It's gonna do what I tell it to. But again, I feel like every once in a while it kind of over predicts me and just it decides that that's where it's going to go, and it's fine. It doesn't, you know, I don't crash it because of it. It's not anything bad. It just it kind of messes with my flow. I have to fly this the Raceflight quad with a known in my mind. I have to genuinely know I'm flying my Raceflight quad, and I can make it fly smooth as hell, and I can make it, you know, not jerk it around. But anyways. So, you know, and the one thing I haven't talked about is KISS. I have flown KISS. KISS is great. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm just not experienced with it. It just wasn't my cup of tea when it first came out, and I just didn't like it. I hear it's great. I think it's probably the most solid, like, or easy to fly, like, get going, really. It's kind of what Raceflight wants to be. Raceflight is simple to set up because of the Wizard, and it's great, and they got that. I mean, the Wizard from OpenPilot was the originator of that, and it was, you know, great. It's still a Wizard. It doesn't fix all, though. A Wizard actually makes things slightly more complicated, and especially for higher level users, a Wizard sometimes is like, what do I do? Do I skip this step? Do I do that step? So, I mean, I like the Raceflight and all, but I think a lot of the issue is if you're going to split your time between the two, or if you're going to switch, you have to clean your mind out, and you have to just remember that you don't know anything about anything, and nobody really does. And even the suggestions you get are just suggestions, even from the best pilots and the best people out there. I honestly, truly believe a lot of tuning comes from just the feel, the experience from it, understanding the correlations and the kind of equations that end up happening between frame, you know, the way a frame is laid out in the COGs. and honestly, a lot of luck and a lot of tinkering. And I think as an individual, if you can start relating and seeing those relationships and the differences and dynamics between them, that's where you really are going to learn the most. I don't think you should look for an overnight answer on the internet. That's why I make these videos, is to kind of explain how I get through all this and how my mind works. I have stumbled my way through this for almost 4 years at this point. I have burnt up a ton of gear by having not the right tools or trying to use tools that aren't the best, by buying the wrong gear, just thinking I knew what I was doing and doing something ahead of time before just looking at it and really understanding it. All of those things I've hoped to have shared with everybody out here, just to be relatable and have them understand that it's difficult, it's fun when it all works, but all that fun is a whole lot of hard work, and keeping things simple and basic and learning at a small rate. Again, don't overcomplicate it. Don't worry about 32-bit ESCs and running 32 kilohertz mode or whatever. Just get something set up and get it flying and tune that and get that thing the cleanest build you've ever made and the best flying build you've ever made. And then take that information, everything you learned, and go build another one. And this time, take a step up. Add something new to the mix. Get some features that you don't know about, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, everyone's spoiled these days with OSD. It's a great example. OSD is on every board now. I didn't run it until it became the standard on every board, and it was in Betaflight. And I won't run OSD on my Raceflight until it's part of the board, which it is now, and part of the firmware. It was before that too complicated. It was too much going on. People blowing cameras up, having issues with VTXs, having issues with this and that. I never had those issues because I waited until it was part of the norm and it was the standard. So that's what I would suggest. I've been talking for 20 minutes. I'm going to go to lunch. It's noon. You guys fly safe, fly smart. Hope I helped you out. Peace.